Andrew Clements, tell us the story of three men, a hotel in Bristol, and an episode of Turbocharged Thunderbirds.
Well, it's a great way to start, Jack. It doesn't sound suspicious at all. But let's see. The year is 2010, and I'm not going to do the whole thing like that because that would be exhausting. The year was 2010. We were in Bristol for Fanderson's TV 21 convention. It was the first time that you and I met. It was the first time that you and Chris met as well. So it was Chris Thompson, friend of the channel, and Jack and myself. We're at the Fanderson TV 21 convention in Bristol, and it was a 2-day convention, and it was one of those ones that gives you a brochure and a list of things that were on. And on the Saturday morning, we spotted that on the next day, the Sunday morning, they were showing an episode of Turbocharged Thunderbirds. What is Turbocharged Thunderbirds? In a very brief snippet, because that's obviously a conversation for another time, Turbocharged Thunderbirds was a 1990s re-edit of the original 1960 Thunderbird series that was done to promote it to a young American audience, completely revoicing all of the original, cutting it down to 20-minute episodes, completely rearranging and restructuring the plots, and adding in a couple of live-action American teenagers to interact with the puppets. It sounds insane. It is insane.
It is insane.
We had never seen it. The only way we were even aware of it was little rumors and whispers in making of books that briefly had like maybe 2 lines about it that says this thing was so bad that Gerry Anderson disowned it, wanted all the episodes destroyed. And we thought, well, if it's that bad, we gotta check that out and just see what that's like. So
it's the best possible advertisement.
Exactly. So for better or worse, Jack and Chris and I decided we'll go along. We went along to this little room in the hotel that they had all the screenings of episodes in.
First thing on the Sunday morning, I think.
First thing on Sunday morning. We got up. We thought, never mind who's being interviewed. We'll go down. We'll see this episode. And we sat down. The opening titles basically gave us an idea of what we were in for. And we laughed for 20 solid minutes throughout the episode and then quoted it for about 3 months afterwards. And thus a permanent friendship was formed in Fire.
That was when it really solidified, I think. That's when I was like, these guys, they're my kind of guys.
So you're telling me that indirectly this whole podcast, all of our friendships and everything, is the result of Turbocharged Thunderbirds?
Yeah,
correct.
Yep.
Well, that explains a lot.
Specifically the Sun Probe episode, and specifically, I think it's fair to say, the line, I sure could use a cool one, eh?
Wow.
With that, let's get into the show. Welcome, everyone, to the Security Hazard Show, the podcast so niche that even John Tracy has stopped listening, unfortunately.
I am here with my co-host, Jack Knoll, a man who knows his space precincts from his space police from A to Z. It's Jack Knoll.
Hello. Thank you, everyone. I'm also joined, of course, by Mr. Ben Wolf Page, and some say he has a third hand exclusively for operating puppet mouths. I've heard it said.
How did you
know? I've not seen it in action myself, but I've heard rumors.
I'm fresh out of hands. If you got that joke, then you're definitely listening to the right podcast.
There you go. But we have a special guest with us this week, Ben. Who's our special guest?
Oh, why, I do believe that it's Andrew Clements, writer, director, producer of all kinds of Gerry Anderson content. How are you doing, Andrew?
I am very well. Thank you very much for having me on the show, guys. And Boy, is it hot today. I mean, it really is. If anybody else is watching or listening from the UK, we're into our third week of a unseasonable heat wave. So it's very, very toasty, but couldn't be happier to be here regardless.
Well, welcome. What have we got coming up on the show today, Jack? What can people look forward to from this episode of the Security Hazard Show?
Well, on today's show, this is an interesting one because it's our first time having a special guest. I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice and very welcoming of us to hand over to the guest and say, please, guest, decide what it is you want to watch. What do you want to talk about on the show? And I waited with great anticipation for Mr. Clements to decide what it was he wanted to watch. And then he revealed what he had planned. And I immediately thought, yes, that is exactly the sort of thing we want to talk about on the Security Hazard Show. Absolutely. So today, at Andrew's choice, and I have to stress this is all his fault, we are watching Agent Crush, the puppet action-adventure movie that was released in 2008, except it wasn't. It also has a release date on IMDb of 2010, except it wasn't. And it finally materialized out of nowhere in about 2019 on various streaming services. So it's a little bit of a mystery, and we're going to dig into it right now by heading over to our Scene Missing segment. Let's go.
Roll the videotape.
Andrew, why did you choose Agent Crush?
I wish I had an answer for you. I wish I had a good answer for you. I suppose a lot of people, knowing me, might think that I would have picked Thunderbirds 2004 for various reasons that don't take too much explaining. I think you and I are probably a little bit burnt out on Thunderbirds 2004 at the moment, Jack.
We've kind of done it. I'm sure it will come up again on this podcast at some point, but yes, we have done the 2004 Thunderbirds movie. That's for sure.
We have.
So,
for those of you who don't know, Andrew wrote a 30,000 word, is that right? A 30,000 word review for Security Hazard about Thunderbirds 2004. And they just did a 6-hour retrospective on the movie and in celebration of the 20th anniversary. So yeah, there's quite a lot of Thunderbirds 2004 content for you to check out. Whether you love the movie or hate it, you'll find something of interest for you, I think.
I think that's a fair point, Ben. So why did I pick Agent Crush? Well, Agent Crush is something that's fascinated me for years, and I'm sure we'll go into the ins and outs of it a little bit later in the show. But I was thinking, what could we do that is Gerry Anderson adjacent? And I very much enjoyed one of the previous episodes of the Security Hazard Show where you both looked back at The Wages of Fair and compared it to other Gerry Anderson episodes being inspired by it. And I thought if we could do something that was Gerry Anderson inspired, do it sort of the other way around, inspired by a Gerry Anderson series or several series, let's do that. And of course, the first thing that came to mind was Team America. And I thought, okay, yeah, we could talk about it, but maybe leave that for another time. It's not my particular cup of tea. What can we do that's like that? And suddenly I remembered Agent Crush. I thought, okay, it's got puppets. It's got a strong connection to the Anderson shows in the form of work by Mike Trim and Derek Meddings. Let's give it a go. Let's see what we think about it. Get a dialogue going. So I ended up picking it.
Yeah. So you've seen it before, Ben. I believe you've watched it once before as well. I
rewatched it for the podcast as well. So
yeah, I watched it for the first time for the podcast, and I was also aware of it. I remember that trailer coming out, back in 2007, 2008, whenever it was, and thinking this looks like an Anderson show. That's what got me interested in it, and then it never materialized, never appeared, and very recently, out of the blue, well, I say very recently, 2019 was it when it came out on streaming services? So gosh, it's been a few years actually. I hadn't even realized that, but yeah, it just suddenly popped up and everyone could watch it, and
with no fanfare really. It just kind of appeared.
Yeah. Well, Ben, you've done a video on your channel in the past sort of speculating why that might have been, what might have happened to this movie. Any thoughts you kind of want to put out there as to what happened?
Yeah, well, I have to I have to stress that I'm not connected to the production in any way, and there's been no public explanation that I'm aware of as far as what happened. A lot of the theories that have circulated on the internet are that there was some sort of problem with the financing of the film, where the backers turned out to be either fraudulent or things weren't done quite properly, so the distributors kind of put it on the shelf on hold while they resolved some of this like difficult legal financial headaches. And that process took a really, really long time. And that's what caused the delay of the film. If someone who worked on the film sees this and has more detail, or if either of you have more detail than that, I'd be interested to hear other versions of the story. I've heard there's a rumor that they waited to release it until after Roger Moore died so that it could be Roger Moore's final credit. Roger Moore is, in fact, a voice of one of the characters in this movie, believe it or not.
Yeah.
That actually doesn't really hold water because he died in 2017, I believe. So this movie wouldn't be his last credit. And on IMDb and Letterboxd and other places to keep lists of movies, it's listed as a 2008 release, even though the film didn't come out until much later. Yeah, because that's the date that it premiered.
I see. I was wondering where that date came from. So yeah, date. So there was a premiere of some kind, but then no distribution.
Exactly.
Okay. Very interesting. Well, yeah. I think the reason why it's so odd that this film didn't materialize with huge fanfare is because of the involvement of people like Sir Roger Moore and just the fantastic cast and crew that were involved with it. Any particular highlights for any of you guys about who was involved in this movie? Mentioned Sir Roger Moore, of course, and I'm sure the Bond fan among us, I mean, I'm sure you're both Bond fans, but I know one particular person who's a big Bond fan who's on this show was very delighted to hear Sir Roger's involvement with it. So, Andrew, was that kind of a highlight for you? One of the factors that drew you in?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was the combination of the Bond stylings put into a Thunderbirds type production. At this point in my life, I think I've forgotten more about Bond than most people will know about Bond in a way. I used to know every nitty gritty detail about all of the movies, all of the books. And it's been that long since I've had to use any of that in casual conversation that it's probably fallen out of my head by now. Still a huge fan, but I just loved the idea of seeing what would it be like if they basically made a James Bond film in Super Mario Nation. How would that look? And Agent Crush is probably about as close as we're ever likely to get with that kind of concept. So as you've mentioned, Roger Moore, big ups for me. That's great. But really the whole cast, everyone in that movie, fantastic actors, seeing all their names in the credits, even having the theme music composed by David Arnold, who did several of the scores for the later Bond movies. Everything like that is it just feels like all the ingredients for the perfect comedy spy movie are there. But we will decide later on, I guess, whether or not those ingredients actually work or not.
Yeah, that's the big question. But yeah, I mean, in the cast, you've also got, obviously, Sir Roger Moore, we mentioned, Brian Blessed voicing the villain. I mean, perfect bit of casting there, in my opinion, anyway. I know he's not to everyone's taste, but I think it's amazing. Neve Campbell, Brian Cox, John Coleshaw, Danny Glover, Ion Grufford.
Ioan Gruffudd. Ioan Gruffudd, I believe is how you pronounce that.
Perfect. There we go. Ruby Wax, Tim McInerney. I mean, goodness me, what a list of names.
It really is a stacked voice cast. It's pretty staggering. And when in the years between this movie kind of being announced and seeing the trailer and the year that it finally came out, there was so much speculation by me and other people about why this movie with such an amazing cast wasn't being released. It was so confusing to all of us to be like, wow. Like, and this was at the peak of Johan Gruffudd is not exactly a household name now, but in those days he had just made a movie called, or he was about to make a movie called Amazing Grace, which was a pretty big hit in America about the abolitionist William Wilberforce. And he had just done The Fantastic Four before this, and of course rose to fame for playing Horatio Hornblower. So he was a pretty big star at the time. And still, still has a pretty vibrant career. He has a TV show that's still on the air, I think. But yeah, just a massive cast, and very confusing to see that the movie was on hold, and frustrating for that.
And from the trailer, looked solid. Like,
yeah,
I think overall the trailer which was the only kind of thing we could see other than a few sort of behind the scenes photos and stuff. It looked like quite an impressive production. At least that was kind of my thought going into it. Anyway, I don't know. What were your first impressions of the trailer, at least when you saw that for the first time?
Well, I remember just being really excited. I think back at that stage, did we even have broadband internet? I'm trying to remember.
I definitely didn't where I lived. No.
So we were probably still on 56K dial-up modems at the time. It's really hazy to me when that actually switched over, but I remember downloading this trailer or finding it somewhere. I can't even remember where I find it, because it was probably YouTube, having been around for about 2 years at that stage.
Yeah.
And it was just this Agent Crush trailer, and I just looked at it and thought, this is just Thunderbirds. It's Thunderbirds with a spy spin, and then you've got all those cast members, and it just looked epic. And I thought, okay, well, this will be out in about 12 months. This is going to be amazing. And little did we know.
Yeah. And then it wasn't. And then it came along a little bit later, and we all got to actually watch it. And I think we've held off long enough now without actually talking about getting into the movie itself. I'll start with my first impressions of it. Not great. Not the worst thing I've ever seen. Not a perfectly serviceable movie, but it did not blow me away. I think that's a fair assessment. There are some, things that niggle me all the way through. There are some really good standout moments that really, really do work for me. And I go, that's what I wish the rest of the movie was like that. But alas, it is not. And it to the point where I thought, in a way, I'm glad it didn't come out when it did, like when it was originally slated for in sort of 2008-ish, because it would have come on to quite big fanfare, and I think a lot of people would have been disappointed by it, and then the thing would have gotten buried, and the people who worked on it maybe would have struggled after the fact. Whereas because it came out so much later and to very little fanfare, it's one of those things that people can just discover, and it doesn't necessarily make a huge impact on the careers of the people that were involved necessarily. So I think, was it worth the wait? No. But did it benefit from that wait? Yes, I think so. That's my opening gambit. What do you guys reckon?
It's definitely,
let Ben go first.
Thank you. It's definitely moved it more into cult movie status, into curio status, the fact that it was held back for so long, which it probably would be anyway. I mean, a Super Mario Nation James Bond parody doesn't exactly scream large, wide, worldwide, global audience to me. I mean, talking about the positive things kind of first, there's just an incredible display of talent in this movie. As far as, I mean, we've talked about the voice cast already, but the music, as AC mentioned, the model making and set building and kind of world building of this movie is very impressive. There's a lot of vehicles to look at, so many explosions. It is startling how many explosions are in this movie. And something I forgot about until I came back to it. I was like, there's a lot of booms, a lot of fireballs, rocket launches, jetpacks, all kinds of gadgets. I mean, it just has a lot of, the gack of a Bond movie just jammed in there, which is really impressive to behold.
Definitely is. Yeah. I would counter that ever so slightly by saying, yes, there's a lot of spectacle. Unfortunately, the story doesn't hold it together whatsoever. So the impact of those amazing models and special effects and stuff like that don't carry the weight to them. They don't have they neither have the charm nor the spectacle of a Bond movie or a Thunderbirds or anything like that. That's my negative. But I agree that there is a display of good work there. And if this were it's a good movie for someone's show reel, I think, because it has those moments which, out of context, work really well. They look fantastic. They look really polished and nicely finished. But put them into a movie, that doesn't quite work for me. Anyway, but Andrew, what about you? What's your hot take on the whole movie as a whole going in?
Well, I would echo both of your sentiments, really. I'm not going to be harsh on it. I think I'm going to be objective about it. There are a lot of things in the movie that I like. The cast, as we've discussed, as actors, they are fantastic people. The models and effects, the way that it's shot, a lot of the time, especially lighting and camera setups and things, very nice to look at. There's some very pretty vistas and scenes in there. I do have a lot of good things to say about it. I think the most unfortunate thing that I can say about the movie is that it feels like a missed opportunity. It feels like if everything else had been dialed up by about 20%, then it would have been excellent. But the fact that there's just these little things, as you say, these little niggling things all the way through it that kind of hold it back in almost every scene where you think, oh, I wish they hadn't done it like that, or I wish they'd done this differently. It's really hard for me to sort of recommend it as like a good movie. I can see there's a lot of love. There's definitely a lot of love has been put into it and a lot of hard work because, as we know, these things do not make themselves. Even the most mundane of scenes to get, I don't know, just for the sake of argument, a puppet to move across a set in a way that doesn't look completely ridiculous. That's not an easy thing to do. So you've got really good stuff going on.
That's a really good point. I would argue that specifically on the topic of puppets moving, the way that they try to get through or get around those difficulties was by just not doing it. The puppets, for the most part, do not move.
Yeah, they are very.
And I think that's a real thing that hampers the whole pace of what is supposed to be an action movie. Is so many scenes are just characters sitting in a room talking about what is going to happen, and there's a little bit of that you can do, but it just lacks the energy that's needed to keep to keep you engaged, to keep you believing in the plot that's kind of unfolding. But the way the plot unfolds is just by people talking about it. So I would say, yes, there was a lot of love for doing those things, but they were almost a little bit too clever about it. Like, they had obviously heard, oh, puppets are a nightmare to make. So we're going to write a script specifically so that they don't do any moving, without the sort of ingenuity that someone like Jerry Anderson had, where they went, okay, the puppets can't do a lot of these things, so let's craft a story where we can sort of make it look like they're doing those things without them actually having to do it, by introducing all the flying vehicles and stuff like that. For some reason, this movie doesn't quite have that level of ingenuity about it. It's not necessarily clever enough to do something unique with it.
Yeah, and it is kind of a storytelling problem. I agree with you there, where it's not so much that the puppets don't move, because they're, as in Jerry Anderson shows, they're in fast-paced, high-speed vehicles, but there's nothing kind of you don't feel a strong sense of like wanting to know what happens next at any point during this movie. You know, that the Trey Parker, the South Park team that made Team America, have a rule about storytelling that's like, it's kind of a yes and rule. That's like therefore and because, like, something happens, therefore something else happens.
Yeah.
Something happens, and because of that, something else happens. So that everything feels like very causal in kind of a chain. And I don't necessarily feel that way about Agent Crush. It's sort of like leaps from one set piece to another in a way that doesn't quite make sense to me.
Yeah, I agree with that, Ben. In fact, I believe when I wrote I think I did an Amazon review for it the first time I watched it back in 2019. And I think I said something along the lines of, there is a scene in this movie where the main character just sits in the background of a shot waiting to be told what to do. And it's
for a really long time.
Yeah, it's like, guys, he's supposed to be the main character in this movie, and yet you literally have him in several scenes, in fact, sitting waiting to be told what's going to happen to him. It's like, no, he should be the one who's actually out there doing the stuff. So it's,
which he finally does do at the end of the movie, and I will say, like, I basically, through the first hour of the whole movie, I was bored. The final 20-minute chunk where Agent Crush actually steps up as the main character of the movie, which, you know, is titled after him. Once he gets started and once he has his purpose and once it gets going, I was like, that's the energy that the rest of the movie needed. It needed to just move and move and move and move. But for some reason, it feels like, the movie basically starts an hour before it should have done. That's the best way I could describe it anyway.
In a weird way as well, it's the same sort of issue. But did either of you feel as if there was like a 20-minute chunk missing from the start of the movie that sort of sets up these characters? Because you immediately get thrown into this thing, and I know it's a common, in media res sort of scenario where you start in the center of the action, but like, just the way that it was done, I didn't care about Agent Crush for the longest time. It's like, I have no emotional connection to this guy. I don't know what he's supposed to be and what he's supposed to do and why I should care about him. He seems really bad at his job. And yet all this stuff is going on. To me, it actually felt as if there was another part of this movie that should have been tacked into it or put into it somewhere. Like, I think the one thing that keeps coming back to me is, they keep making the joke about his toilet badge that he has.
What on earth is a toilet badge? I mean,
what that is, and I only noticed it this time around, Jack, is in the, like, I'm not sure how much spoilers we're talking about here. I'll try to keep it fairly vague, but I mean, it's just the very beginning of the movie. In that opening chase sequence, they go past this big billboard that says Agent Flush. And I think what they did was, there was probably something in the story that said Professor Spanners had a bottle of Agent Flush in his bathroom. He peeled off the badge or the sticker from it and just changed the FL to CR, which is why if you look behind his badge, you can see the outline doesn't match the letters, and just said this can be his special badge. But you don't get any of that. You know, I was waiting for like a reveal moment for them to say, this is why it looks like a toilet. This is why, you know, everyone keeps referring to it as a toilet badge. And you never get that moment. You just get a bit at the end where he says, oh, and we'll give you a real badge. And he says, no, I'd like to keep the one that I already have.
Which I like that bit. I like that sort of,
it's a nice
charming moment. Yeah.
It's just a shame it wasn't set up properly, like you say.
Correct.
It needed that when you've got a character like Agent Crush who is sort of like us but not like us. You need that to be spelled out incredibly clearly from the top of the movie, and you ideally need to see that origin story of like how he was created, how he was intended for one specific purpose but didn't end up serving that purpose, so that's why. And it's there, as you say, it's like there in the movie, the ingredients of it are present, but the story gets confused and muddled slightly, and you don't follow the line of it all the way.
All it really needed,
it's tricky. Yeah.
All it really needed to sell that would have been a brief flashback sequence in the middle somewhere. An example would be, say you had something like Captain America or the first Avengers movie. I can't remember which one it happens in, but there's a bit where they sort of flash back to how they find Captain America frozen in the ice. And that's like, oh my gosh, he's still alive. And that's all you needed. It's like a 30-second scene. So instead of saying in the dialogue, oh, we find Captain America trapped in the ice, and that's all you get, they showed the scene. So show, don't tell. That sort of logic.
Yeah. We do get a scene like that with Agent Crush where they explain kind of who he is, but they tell us, they don't show us.
It's a long dialogue scene in amongst a lot of other long dialogue scenes. So there's nothing that gives it focus. There's nothing that makes that moment stand out when it really should stand out, because it's quite important. It's important to know what your main character's motivation is and what's going on. And I didn't get any of that all the way through. All I knew about Agent Crush through the first hour of the movie was that I found him quite irritating because of all the quippy humor. Had I known that, or had it really clearly spelled out to me that quippy humor sort of came from the fact that he was robotic in nature, maybe that would have made me more sympathetic towards him and made me go, oh, okay, I understand where this is coming from now. But it just wasn't clear. It just wasn't clear from the start. So, yeah.
When I first started watching this movie, there's a pre-title sequence, sort of in a Bond style. And watching that pre-title sequence, I was like, oh, this is kind of a Johnny English type of movie, where it's like a comedy, spy, early 2000s kind of energy. And then all that energy that builds up in that opening sequence kind of disappears. And suddenly you learn that he's not a bumbling spy like Johnny English or any of those kind of, James Bond parodies that you could think of, Fletch or someone like that. He's actually a robotic figure. And that sort of changes the tone of the movie. It feels like a big shift from that opening sequence. It's like an opening sequence to a different movie in a way.
Yeah, because you move from him being a bumbling fool, they go, oh no, Agent Crush is messed up again, to immediately we're going to execute him. Not to spoil it too much, but that's where they go immediately afterwards. And it's just like, whoa, we're being a little bit too clinical about all this, aren't we? So it just, as you say, suddenly shifts. That opening sequence, I have to be honest, didn't make a great impression on me, because I was just immediately struck by, I'll be honest, I think the cinematography is a little ugly. I think some of the color grading is maybe a little bit just not quite right. It feels like it should have a sort of a brighter energy. I feel like the whole movie just has this sort of smear of bluey gray over the top of it that just feels far too cold and just doesn't invite me in.
It definitely doesn't have a colorful kids movie kind of look.
No, it doesn't.
Which is not it's not really targeted. It's I guess a question of who the audience for the movie is. I mean, is the
That's
audience
a really, really good question, Ben, because following on from what you said previously about the sudden shift in tone when you realize that he's a robot, he's not a bumbling human. Tonally, the movie is all over the place. Like it never seems to land in one consistent tone, because you go from an excessive, and I mean an excessive amount of fart jokes the entire way through. They come in little, much like farts, they come in little peaks and troughs. And between those little peaks and troughs, you have moments where they do genuinely try to sort of have heartfelt bits.
right?
Yeah.
But you know that you can't really take those too seriously, because any second there's going to be another fart joke coming along.
And the problem is that shift in tone doesn't necessarily come as a surprise. I think the thing that makes something like, in my opinion, something like Team America funny is that it's constantly subverting your expectations. The big laughs come from you think it's going to go one way, and then it suddenly goes a completely different way. It's the like in Team America, not to get too into the weeds on that, but what I think is fundamentally funny about that movie is the massive contrast between the spectacle of the sets and the, really, really amazing model making that's on display there versus what the characters are doing and saying. That's where the humor is there. Whereas Agent Crush, it's sort of just established very early on, and it's said in the dialogue itself, like, well, we're just a bunch of bumbling villains and all the people surrounding me are idiots, and I'm going to make fart jokes all the way through. And isn't that funny? There's nothing that catches you off guard in any of that. It's just, okay, you're trying to make lots of fart jokes and you're trying really hard to make me laugh at them, but I'm sorry, they're not surprising me in any way, shape, or form.
Though. While they're completely unsurprising, and there's not a single one of them that elicits even a slight chuckle out of you, some of Brian's lines are still gold. The way that he delivers them, like there's a bit where she says, where Olga says, Boris, you're all heart, and he just he gravely takes offense at this, says, no, I'm not. And just, the way that he suddenly just comes back at that, I just thought, okay, yeah. Brian made that funny with his delivery. That's all I wanted. Yeah.
That particular character, who's, by the way, if we haven't said, his name is Boris Goodfarter.
Yes.
Spelled
P-H-A-T-E-R.
Yeah. If it wasn't for, basically that whole character is sort of, in a way, the puppet felt like it was getting in the way of Brian's performance. It wasn't quite delivering in the way that it needed to, but
yeah, can we talk about the puppets?
You're listening to Brian Blessed. Yes, Ben, let's talk about the puppets.
Do we have to, Ben? Do we have to talk about those puppets?
Well, the puppets are an interesting phenomenon. Sometimes puppetry is sort of a movement-based art form. And these puppets, as you say, don't move very much. They mainly talk, but when they talk, the lip sync is more of a vague suggestion,
a lip estimation. Yeah,
I mean, it doesn't feel a lot of times, particularly with some of Brian Blessed's delivery, where he's really kind of going for it in his own particular way, his own unique style. It didn't seem to transfer to the capabilities of the puppet to enunciate.
Yes. Yeah.
It's hard to explain other than that, because I think if you see these puppets in stills, they're not the world's most beautiful or, endearing, attractive puppets. But if you see them in stills, they look considerably better than they do in motion.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Which is a really
It's interesting though, that style of, they are ugly puppets to the extent where it looks like a deliberate choice, where
they look more like spitting image puppets in a way.
They do.
Yeah, which is an odd fit for a story which is so heavily inspired by the likes of Thunderbirds, where it's like the puppets are made to look like handsome characters, like good looking characters. So it would have been clever to subvert that if the story was also doing something clever to subvert that, but it doesn't. It just plays them totally straight. And as you say, yeah, the way they move is so limited that you have this amazing voice cast doing fairly good work for the most part. There are a few exceptions, doing amazing work, and none of it comes through on screen. It's almost a movie that's it's in those dialogue scenes anyway. It's almost better to shut your eyes and not to just listen.
I did that a few times.
Really? Oh boy.
I honestly did. I was like, okay, let's just picture this as a live action movie just for a second. Close my eyes for like half a scene, and I thought, yeah, see, it does make it slightly better. Not looking at the way that the worst offenders for me are probably, in terms of lip sync, is probably Burt Gasket, voiced by Roger Moore, because it's doing Roger a disservice, the fact that that puppet's lip sync is so horrendously off compared to what Roger's doing. Generally, the emotions just aren't there. It's funny how, again, going back to the Thunderbirds puppets, you could get Shane Rimmer voicing Scott Tracy, giving the most dramatic, intense performance, and just because of the way they were puppeteering it and shooting it, you would believe that Scott was, saying those lines with all his heart. Whereas with the Agent Crush puppets, a lot of the time there's a lot of intensity, especially Professor Spanner's. Brian Cox is getting all het up about something and making impassioned pleas on behalf of his work and everything. But you just don't buy it because the puppet is not doing anything to sell that performance. It's just going.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's
and they're also not really blank enough that you can call them a blank slate, because part of the thing about puppetry is that the audience can imagine those emotions. You know what I mean? Like the puppets may not be that expressive, but if you can, create sort of an abstract shape that people can project their own emotions onto, then that can work also. But
Darth Vader.
Right, exactly. Or, pick your favorite Star Wars character who doesn't have a face.
Yes, plenty to choose from. Yeah, no, that's exactly it.
But this doesn't fall into either camp. It's in some
and then also you've got the problem of a story that you can't quite follow what the emotions. It's like the audience doesn't know what they're supposed to be feeling. It's just words being traded back and forth between certain characters, some of whom are somewhat likable. Like I do like Brian Cox as Spanners is really nice. I think his character's motivations are very clear. Arguably, I would say he's the main character, not Agent Crush.
Agree. I'm really glad you brought that up, both of you, because I think Brian Cox is carrying this movie. On his shoulders. I mean, it's the best performance in the movie for sure. And it really is the only thing that gives it any kind of cohesion at all, is that
he feels like a human being. That's the thing. The character does feel very humanized. Brian gives it a wonderfully straight performance, I think, compared to some of the others that are going for, I was going to say a heightened performance, but I don't think that's accurate. I'm going to just say some kind of performance.
I don't think they've been given direction. I don't think they know what
that's it.
Like the thing is, Brian Blessed, wonderful as he is basically just doing Brian Blessed himself. He has not been told what he needs to do. So he's like, well, I've been hired. I'm working on a sort of spy spoof thing. It's a comedy script. So I'm going to do, because we know Brian Blessed has range as an actor.
Oh, yeah, Brian can act. Brian
Space 1999. But there's two different modes to Brian Blessed. And fortunately or unfortunately, the one he's been told to do for this movie is, Maximum Brian, all of that stuff, which I think is great. It's the thing that fits the character better than maybe one of his more subtle performances. But it is very clear that he's just been told, just sit in front of this microphone and read the script, doing your Brian Blessed thing. And the same thing applies to all the other, pretty much all the other actors in this, with the difference being that the other actors don't have quite so clearly defined shticks that they're supposed to be doing.
I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second and jump in here if I may.
Yes.
Did either of you get the feeling that obviously we're very used to doing voices and writing for voices and audio plays and things like that, so we know what it's like when a cast is recording remotely or together in a studio.
Oh yeah.
Did anyone else feel that 90% of the cast didn't meet each other during this process and were therefore performing their roles in vastly different energies from each other, so that you were having 3 characters in the scene having 3 very different conversations?
Yes. Yes.
There's a lot of that, particularly in the kind of underground control room under the Statue of Liberty, where Roger Moore, Danny Glover, and a technician are hanging out.
So the technician that performance is pitched, I think, just right, where it's like serious with like little throwaway lines of humor. You've got Roger Moore in that scene basically just reading it. Again, he's been told, I mean, he is basically playing himself in that whole scene. They've even made the puppet to sort of look like
him a little bit
in a very unflattering way. Like, you think, if you're going to make your puppet look like Roger Moore, why make him look like that? And then there's Danny Glover playing Major Gubbins.
Don't get me started on that character.
The worst character I have ever encountered, given so much screen time. Not earning a single second of it. And
I think I described it in my initial review as a man who performs every word as if it's its own sentence.
Yes. That's a very good
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. And you go, where was the direction there? As you say, 3 different actors in the same scene performing it all very, very differently.
I wonder, too, also to kind of play devil's advocate, since this film was created over a stretch of time, I've seen behind-the-scenes photos that are dated as far back as 2005. I don't know how long exactly they spent making this movie, but it seems like it was at least 3, 4, maybe 5 years. Yeah. I wonder if some of those performances were literally recorded years apart. Almost as they were finding the money, and therefore it made it really difficult to create cohesion between different performances.
Right, and that's the thing. If you know that that's going to be the way you're going to make your movie, because that happens, and as Andrew, as you said, it's a common thing, particularly post COVID and things like that. Like, we're used to those things being recorded in isolation, but therefore you need a director who is totally in tune with where the script is going, where all the beats are in the movie, and what your actors need to be doing at that particular moment, and they need to be able to communicate that to the actor. None of that felt like it was happening in this. It just felt like, well, we got Roger Moore in for the afternoon, let's sit him down. And literally, I don't know if it's the same on the version that you watched, but in the end credits, there's all this behind the scenes footage, which really bizarre to include in there. Literally, I mean, very clearly showing that the actors are all recording in isolation, almost boasting about it in a way that's like, that doesn't feel right. But yeah,
I guess
very very apparent.
It could be, and forgive me if I'm not getting this right, but I'm going to say that Sean Robinson is obviously very good at the prop side of things, but having a look through his credits, I didn't see him credited as a director on many other projects. And I just sort of wondered, maybe was it a case that you've got Roger Moore, you've got Brian Blessed in the studio, and you don't want to be the guy to tell them you're doing it wrong or do that a different way. Because I know certainly, sometimes actually I have directed John Culshaw. So weirdly enough, and there's a little bit of hesitancy there when you know that he's giving 110% in a performance, but that based on the script, it's a great performance, but it's not the performance that you actually need from him. And you're maybe a little bit hesitant to say, could we maybe do that slightly differently, framing it with this in mind? And these are professionals. That's what they do. They take direction. They alter their performances accordingly. But I just wondered, was there maybe something in the background where people didn't feel like it was their place to interfere with these very high up actors and tell them what to do?
Almost certainly, yeah. I think that's for sure. And in that situation, though, you need, if you as a director, like I can imagine, and based on the fact that this movie is dedicated to Derek Meddings and there's such a heavy evident, it's very clear that Sean Robinson wanted to make a tribute to special effects and practical model making and that sort of thing. But it takes more than that to tell a complete story and to tell to produce a complete movie. In which case, it's like, okay, if Sean's very, very good at that side of it, which I think he is, I think it does come through. Certainly one of it's a very talented effort that goes into the practical model making side of things. But yeah, if you're not so strong on directing actors, then you need someone else to do that bit for you. I'm not sure whether maybe that was the case on the movie and it just didn't work out. But yeah, there is a sense of there are some things done really well in this movie, and then there are some things where it clearly needed more expertise. I think voice acting is one of them. I think puppets is also another. Like you say, wouldn't it be great if it was maybe a live action movie that wasn't so dependent on the puppets, just so the special effects weren't having to carry quite so much of it. But yeah, let's talk about special effects, because there's a lot. There's a lot of them. And there's some that I really, really like. There's some that I think feel a little bit rushed. I think there are moments in things like flying cars. I think the Venom sports car, that felt a little bit under detailed, a little bit too clean and polished. It needed a little bit more grit to it. But we have to talk about that rocket launch shot. What appears to be a real sky, a note taken straight out of Doppelganger, of course. But it works. It doesn't fit the tone of the movie whatsoever, but as a shot, as a spectacle, it's amazing.
I am, to be honest, a bit fuzzy on what that rocket was doing in the movie. This is from someone who's seen the movie twice. I didn't know what the story purpose of it was. It was like, oh, now we're launching a rocket. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it was something to do with the space station being a backup for the ground station that had been destroyed by Piston Pete. And I think whatever they were sending up to the space station restored the energy.
It eventually restores their power, but it wasn't clear to me watching it that was what was happening.
No.
Yeah.
I didn't connect the dots. But it is a truly beautiful, like, definitely took a note from Derek Meddings and ran with it.
I was very tempted to sort of see if we could maybe redub that with the Sun Probe launch theme just to see what it would be like. But
extraordinary.
It was very nicely shot, and I will take my hat off to them about that. That it just worked really well.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, and this is it. It's you have those one or two really good moments. Unfortunately, that doesn't make a movie. You need it to be consistently good all the way through. I'm trying to think of other sort of things that stood out to me. Things like the train crash. Again, it was like,
that's a highlight for me, for sure.
Lots of bangs and explosions going off, but apart from Brian Blessed saying, "I don't like it when people mess with my trains," I didn't really understand why it was happening or what was going on. I tuned out by that point in terms of story.
I think I only picked it up this time through because I distinctly remember the first time that I watched it, and I just thought there was no plot in that movie. Like, it was just a sequence of events that lasted for 80-something minutes. This time I did try to pay attention to as much as I possibly could. So I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, Ben, but wasn't it he wanted the nuclear power supply that the train was carrying so he could put it on the back of his vehicle to take it into the volcano, so that would be the thing that caused the explosion?
Yeah, so his plot, Boris Goodfarter's plot, is to destroy the human race and replace them with more android people like himself. Fartermans, I believe he calls them. We don't ever see one unless Piston Pete counts as one. He's not explicitly referred to on screen as a farterman.
We're assuming that Olga is a human, but is somehow going along with Boris's plan just because.
It isn't clear to me if she's a human or an android like Agent Crush. If so, was she built by Boris? Don't know. Yeah.
So many questions.
But his ploy to destroy the human race is to, as you say, take that core to an underground place near the center of the Earth
that can be accessed from a train tunnel.
Stick a detonator in it and blow it up, and that seems like it would just destroy the whole Earth, not just the human race, and therefore make it impossible to repopulate the Earth with fartermans.
Side note, just before we continue down this lava tunnel, that little signpost that says
I was just going to say that was the one joke I actually found funny.
That is a good joke
because I wasn't expecting it at all. It's like, oh, that's a weird quirky thing in there. Like that made me laugh. Yeah, that sign.
There was one that made me laugh on the first time, and I was waiting for it to come around this time. The one part that I, honest to goodness, belly laughed at the first time around is at the end where Rusty Gubbins screws up again, and Bert says, "Well, that's enough of that, Captain." He says, "No, I'm a major." Said, "Not any Roger Moore."
Oh boy!
Because it came out of absolutely nowhere. I just the laughter was just forced out of me uncontrollably because it was so ridiculous.
Yeah.
I couldn't help
it. Those moments where you don't expect it. It just totally subverts it. It demonstrates a level of self-awareness that I think this movie maybe needed. Was a little bit of self-awareness of what they were making. If they were going to go down the comedy spoof route, then they need to go all in on that. If they were going to take it seriously as a family action movie, then they needed to go very firmly in that direction. It's just, very muddled. Just lots of elements kind of thrown in, and that's where they landed at. But well, thank you for explaining the train crash sequence. I'm not sure it's any clearer to me now, but I appreciate you trying to make that.
I did like the little avalanche afterwards when the part of the cliff collapses. That was quite well done.
Yeah,
it's really nice. The designs, I think this movie is designed by Mike Trim.
Yeah, and you can tell.
It's a real crime that Mike Trim never designed a Bond movie, as far as I know, that he didn't do more major motion picture work, because his work with Jerry Anderson on this, on Jeff's War of the Worlds. Designed that album sleeve cover, just phenomenal work, and a really truly great designer who should have been more recognized and lauded in his field, I think. So
I agree.
Hats off to Sean Robinson for bringing in Mike Trim to do this, because it's a great piece of design.
Gonna say something that could potentially be a little bit controversial. Hopefully not. Hopefully you'll take it in the spirit that it's intended. But sometimes I look at Mike Trim's concept art, and I could look at that stuff for hours and hours and just appreciate every little detail. Like, I'm sure you'll know the one I mean, but his original sketch for the Spectrum passenger jets, and the Shadow Mobile, and various things. And sometimes when you see the finished model, you're like, okay, that is an amazing model. It looks fantastic, but I actually like the concept art even more.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's a very distinctive style, and some model makers are able to capture it better than others. And I think literally in this movie, there are models that capture that style better than others, and it's not necessarily consistent all the way through. Like Goodfarter's vehicle, that
which I believe is called it's called the Sidewinder.
Of course it is. Of course it is. But that is striking. That has that.
Just a beautiful model. Just
made for the screen. It serves its purpose perfectly. It's over the top, which I think more of the vehicle design should have been over the top. As much as that rocket sequence looks amazing, the rocket itself is
somewhat more fairly conventional.
very conventional, very generic. So there's a slight inconsistency in the styles here that maybe could have been knitted together a little bit better to produce something bold and unique. And I think that's the other thing that really lets this movie down, is it tries to be so many things, like James Bond, like Thunderbirds. I think a little bit of Team America is in there as well. It tries to be all of those things, that it fails to do anything, or fails to do many things that are unique and make it special in its own right. And I can't imagine anyone sitting down to watch this, if you've never seen a Bond movie or you've never seen Thunderbirds. What are you getting out of? What are you getting out of?
No context to understand what's happening,
right? And I don't think that's a good thing for a movie to be, particularly when you spent millions of dollars or pounds or whatever on it. No, it needs to have something of a general appeal about it to make it work. And this just doesn't quite have it, unfortunately.
The example that I've heard most recently is, I've heard of so many people who have watched Rogue One, a Star Wars story, not having seen any of the other Star Wars movies, and have just come out loving it because they think it's an absolutely amazing story, and they don't necessarily want to go and watch the other ones. It's just like, no, I saw that movie because, for reason X, Y, Z, and I love it. And that's what this sort of thing should be. It should be, don't worry about appealing to the people who are into these sort of more niche things. Appeal to your bigger audience. Yes, okay, it might be a passion project for you to be able to put this together, but if you actually want to be able to make more of these things, it has to reach its audience.
Yeah, it's why something like Johnny English works really well, because it's funny and entertaining in its own right. If you know Bond and you know the tropes of those movies, then
you get a little bit more out of it.
Yeah, you can get more if you want to, or you can just enjoy it for what it is, kind of at face value. Yeah. And there is too. I don't know if Agent Crush is guilty of this so much, perhaps, but there is too like a sense of people trying to build an IP before they've made a film. So they're trying to like set up a whole franchise and like, well, we'll fix it in the sequels. We'll build our canon later on down the line. But you really do have to make one good thing before you can build a whole good franchise, I think.
And I had completely forgotten that this movie ends with a Agent Crush will return in.
That's true.
I forgot the Flatulator or something. Is that what it's called? Yeah,
we're still waiting on that.
Particularly to see that caption come up, obviously, over 10 years since the movie was made. I was just like, is that a joke? I honestly thought that was a joke.
I think it probably was intended to be one.
Seriously.
Yeah, because it's a Bond reference, isn't it? The end title card, James Bond will return in whatever the title of the next movie is going to be.
Yeah.
Here's a question that's just occurred to me. The bit at the end where Boris is in that pool of stuff and there's all the mist around him and he's bobbing up and down talking about how he's going to get his revenge or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, isn't he supposed to still be in the lava cave at that stage? So why is whatever he's in blue or green? Like what's happened there?
Because he's farted in it.
Possibly.
My theory is that in the explosion, he was propelled up to the North Pole and came out of Earth's crust.
In like a hot spring or something.
In a hot spring or some such.
Okay, fair enough.
That's a stretch, isn't it?
Is it though, Jack? For this movie, is it really a stretch?
Yeah. But that's it. It's almost done in such a it's like, okay, now we are going to do the thing where we maybe set up a sequel. If someone gives us the money, we'll make more. We'll expand on this IP if we can. But it's done in such a uninspired way that you almost just ignore it. You don't even it just kind of glosses over, which is why I completely forgotten about that caption. Agent Crush will, like you say, it could have been intended as a joke, but that joke would have been much more apparent if the movie had landed on its sense of humor better and kind of set up that it would potentially do things like that. So
well, here's the thing.
Yeah,
since we have been a little bit down on this movie, we've you know, we've said some nice things, but we've been largely a little bit.
It's not our favorite movie.
It's not our favorite movie,
right?
Given that it is a movie that is very heavily inspired by Jerry Anderson Productions. Why don't we turn things around for a little bit and see how many direct or indirect Anderson references that we noticed sprinkled throughout? I'm going to lead with one, that the Venom, as previously mentioned by Jack, the passenger seat faces backwards, just like the SPV.
Yeah.
So it does.
In a similar sequence, when Crush needs to be the man to save the day and doesn't want Spanners to get taken out as well, he ejects him from it, just like in Scarlet, when Scarlet would always fire Blue out of the SPV. Suddenly Crush is ejecting Spanners, and it's done in a more comedic fashion, but the reference is there.
No, but I like that. I think that is a very clear beat. I think it just sets the tone. That's where they wanted to be. I'd say that whole last 20 minutes of the movie, that's what the whole movie should have been like, where it's quick, and the jokes and the little nods and things like that are just that. They're just little nods. I think that works really well. The one that stood out to me, which was incredibly not subtle, was the Meddings intake and salvage sign that's on the front of the junkyard. It's like, well, that's a tribute to Derek Meddings if ever I saw one. That would be the one that one certainly stood out to me. Yeah, absolutely. Ben, any other little nods in there?
Ooh, I was pleased to get Brian Blessed doing the voice of a puppet, because of course Brian Blessed appears, in Space 1999 famously
twice.
Never voices a puppet character, and he's just perfect to do a Supermarionation voice. He would have been great if they had gone more that direction of having actor cameos, as they wanted to do around Captain Scarlet era, where they were talking about bringing in people like Patrick McGowan and making puppets that looked like them and having them do the voices. If they had done that, with Brian Blessed would have been a great choice to bring on. And he has like some of that Anderson spirit. He's really great in The Day After Tomorrow, which Jack has written a great review of on his blog.
Yeah.
So yeah, he really brings the Anderson spirit, I think, to this.
As I say, I adore his performances in Day After Tomorrow and Space 1999, because it's not the big shouty version of Brian Blessed. It's him really.
He goes a lot smaller.
Really going a lot smaller, and he's so good at that, and he's good at doing big shouty as well. And I think that probably was the right fit for this character. I mean, of all the characters in the movie, there's a reason why that one's probably the most memorable. It's because it kind of feels the most well-rounded. It's like, no, Brian understood the assignment and he just did it, and he does it really well. You get little moments of his boss Nass from Phantom Menace. Little noise in there and things like that. Like, he's just having a good time. Yeah. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes just hearing an actor having fun is enough.
Sure. There are moments in the movie that feel like they were things that should have been left on the cutting room floor. Things that were like little improvisations or something that didn't, that noise that Brian Blessed makes by flapping his cheeks. I mean, Boris Goodfarter has no cheeks to flap, really.
Yeah, so that's true.
It's like, how is he making that? Is he like flapping his tongue in there? It feels strange coming out.
There's an image.
It's just an odd, off-putting moment. And then other things like John Culshaw's Terry Wogan impression in there randomly.
Well, I mean, it's really distracting because all the way through John Culshaw's doing Ozzy Osbourne, right?
Ozzy Osbourne.
It's pretty obvious that that's what he's doing, and it's
very intentionally. It's Ozzy Osbourne, and then when the robot is malfunctioning, he turns into Terry Wogan for a second. And I think from having professionally interacted with John Culshaw, it's sort of a thing that impressionists and actors do when they're warming up. When they're getting ready to do an impression, they'll sometimes, they'll test the range and they'll be like, oh, I've slipped into Wogan a little bit by, doing too much of this or too much of that. And it's kind of like tuning your instrument in a way.
Yeah,
And
and in the right setting, that stuff is funny and entertaining and interesting. But when you're trying to tell a story, it just completely derails.
It's a lot of
and
fun
gets in
for the
way.
crew. It's a lot of fun for the crew, and I think the crew probably had a lot of laughs with John in the studio when they were recording that stuff, and they were like, "Well, that was so funny, we should put it in the movie." But what's funny to the crew isn't necessarily funny to an audience. I think.
Yeah,
and
the fact that they
director's job should be to pick out those moments,
pick out those bits, and then the
very
fact
challenging work.
They even zoomed in on it a little bit more because they had, was it Gubbins saying something like, "Who's Wogan?"
Right.
And it's like,
what's a Wogan? What's a Wogan?
What's a Wogan? That's it. And it's like,
okay, you had a joke there, and you just sort of trampled all over it. Even the movie itself is turning around and saying that's not funny, which is just really not what you want. You at least need some confidence in the jokes and things like that. So yeah.
But this movie is I've made a video about this movie for my own YouTube channel, and this movie is important to me in a lot of ways because it is sort of the definitive example, other than I guess Team America, of like trying to do a big budget Super Mario Nation revival. There's not a lot of other examples other than maybe the Thunderbirds pilot that didn't happen, Thunderbirds IR, which has some similar energy. So I hold it close to my heart in a lot of ways because of that, because of the effort that I can see that went in, and all the swings for the fences that are in this movie that just don't quite land for whatever reason, and it's difficult to parse out. I mean, clearly we've discussed maybe some work on the screenplay would have helped, but there's just a lack of cohesion, which is a real shame because I want to root for this movie. I want to believe in it.
Yeah.
And I want to root for Agent Crush.
Yeah.
Almost everybody in this cast is someone who was suggested to me when I was casting a feature film with puppets, unbeknownst to the casting director who had never seen Agent Crush, never heard of it. But they, a lot of these names came up, and I was like, man, I can't do that because Agent Crush already did it. And I don't know. It's just such an example for me as a person who's actually been in the trenches making films with puppets. I can relate to so many of those struggles of trying to like figure out how to position actors' performances with the performances of the puppeteers and how to make it all fit together. It's a very tricky jigsaw puzzle making a movie like this. And so my hat is off to them for even going to bat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say this hand on heart that I do not enjoy saying negative things about this movie. I do not. There are some movies that I would happily slate until the day I leave. And it's the fact that I'm not going to name any names because partly I can't think of any offhandedly, but there are some movies and I would just say, that's a terrible movie. Won't be watching that again. They clearly put no effort into it and it's not my kind of thing. Whereas with this, it physically sort of hurts to have to say, oh, they were so close. They could have just done it differently and it would have been better, or it's not quite there, or it doesn't quite work. And that's not an easy thing to say because you can tell just by looking at it, everyone was putting in the work. They were putting so much effort into it that in all departments, it really should work. Yeah. And yet, just because you work really hard on something doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a success because it's just not gelling. It's just the jigsaw pieces are there, but they haven't been assembled in the right order.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, that's it. I think in a way they're sort of obviously the direct comparison that springs to my mind is Team America, and the thing that where Team America succeeds is that it takes the ingredients and tries to do something new with them. It tells a type of story that has never been told before with, big impressive special effects and big impressive puppets. And, love or hate the humor of something like Team America, it made an impression because it was unlike anything that you could see anywhere else. Whereas I think Agent Crush tries so hard to pay tribute, and it is a kind of really impressive tribute to that kind of filmmaking, the practical special effects and everything. It tries so hard to do that it forgets to do its own thing at the same time. And those are the moments that I find myself the most frustrated watching the movie. Is like, I just wish it was giving a little bit more of its own personality to it. I wish I'd seen a bit more of the intention with which it was made. But yeah, I can't deny it. It's a movie that I wish worked better than it does.
There's another comparison that we could make, and I've just this moment thought about it, is Firestorm. In that you've got those more advanced puppets that are capable of more expressive features than the Super Marionation puppets would have been capable of. And even some of the production design, in a way, is kind of similar. It's definitely of the same ilk, if not of the exact same outcome. And yet it's a chasmous gulf between those two. And even though Firestorm is only 7 or 8 minutes long and doesn't have time to set up a whole story and narrative in the traditional film kind of sense, it still has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and is a complete story by itself, and is generally really, really good. It's just a shame.
And a really strong sense of character.
Yes, exactly.
In that pilot, I think. Yeah.
You know who those characters are from the moment they appear. There's no guessing needed. You don't need their background information filled in along the way. It's like, nope, I get it. It's very clear who these characters are. And it just runs with it from there. And
who they are and what they want. Very clear.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
What is my motivation?
Exactly. Yes. Precisely. Yes. Agent Crush himself. Oh, he desperately needed a bit of motivation. But
Crush rocks.
Crush rocks. Oh, so I mean, to kind of wrap up this conversation, would Andrew, we'll start with you. Should people watch this movie?
I'll tell you how I watched it originally, Jack. I watched it with Chris. The two of us just got some snacks and drinks in, sat down, watched it. And if we're honest, we had a bit of a laugh just, going through it and critiquing it while we were watching it the first time. So I say, if you're into things like Thunderbirds, or if you're into the Bond movies or spy parodies, and you have some good mates that you don't mind having a bit of a laugh at a slightly embarrassing film, go for it. You might have a nice night, as long as you don't try to take it too seriously or your expectations aren't set too high. Best thing to do, set your expectations low. You probably won't be too surprised, but it equally won't be the worst movie that you ever see.
Yeah, good assessment. Ben, how about you? What do you think? What are your closing thoughts?
For me personally, I would rather have 10 Agent Crushes than any of the Minecraft movie nonsense that we typically get these days. So, at least this is like a movie made by a person with a personal vision. It doesn't totally work in my opinion, but I salute that kind of filmmaking and recommend that people check it out if you're pretty much with the same caveats as AC laid out there. If you're prepared for it to be kind of what it is, if you have a sense of what it is going in, if you have, some taste for that sort of thing already, for Thunderbirds or Bond or any of those, then I think it's worth giving a spin, especially if you have some beverages handy.
Definitely. Yeah, I echo that completely. I think if you go into this, and I think, why my first viewing of it, I actually didn't know what to expect. I didn't know whether it was good or bad. I had actually kind of steered clear of reading any reviews of it. I wanted to come in totally fresh. And as a result of that, I was disappointed because I was hoping that it would be really good. And, it wasn't. But what it stands up as is a bold experiment. It's a good example of what could have been if you applied modern technology with good old-fashioned practical filmmaking, what is the kind of combination that comes out? And that continues to be with Firestorm, as you mentioned. Team America has a lot to kind of play for that. I think also that Thunderbirds IR pilot that you mentioned, Ben. All of those things are interesting experiments of, you know, what if we took those techniques and we applied them today and we combined them? Has anyone ever come up with the right combination of things to make that happen? I'm not sure, but I think Agent Crush gives it a really good try. And I think if that interests you, then definitely this is the movie for you. This is something to take a good look at. But yeah, I think that's all we have to say on Agent Crush. So I just have to kind of finish by saying thank you, everyone, for listening to the Security Hazard Show. We broadcast this live every single Wednesday, 6 p.m. UK time on youtube.com/Jack Knoll. You can subscribe on YouTube to watch it live as it goes out, watch and listen in real time. And of course, you can also catch other Gerry Anderson related videos on the channel as well. And you can also listen to the Security Hazard Show on your favorite podcast platforms of choice as well. Rate and review us wherever you're listening or watching, because that helps us to reach our new audience with this plucky little show.
Yes, definitely subscribe. And for now, the best way to help support us is through the Ko-Fi page, ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com/Jack Knoll. And you can give to Jack's Ko-Fi, but we might have some news on that front coming very soon.
Very, very soon. Yes, stay tuned for that. And for everything else, from me, head to securityhazard.net. That's your one-stop shop for blog posts, reviews, videos, podcasts about all things Gerry Anderson. Of course, the 2004 movie retrospective that we mentioned earlier on, that's on there. The Day After Tomorrow review that Ben mentioned as well, that's all on securityhazard.net. You can also find links to all my social media, Facebook, X, Blue Sky, and beyond. Just look for Security Hazard. Ben, where can people find you?
Goodness me, I'm at Cinemarionette on YouTube and on X. Over on YouTube, I've got a short film that just came out on Sunday that Jack and I made together in no less than 48 hours. We're putting our money where our mouth is. We're not just puppet film critics. We're also puppet film makers. So go and check that out. It's at Cinemarionette on YouTube. Yes. And there's also a bunch of Starfleet content. I have a Starfleet blog if you're interested in that non-Gerry Anderson, but Gerry Anderson inspired show. You can find links to all of those things and the rest of my social media channels at benwolf.page.
Excellent, excellent. Andrew, Mr. Clements, where do you want to send people? What would people be interested in seeing to get a bit more of you and what you do?
Well, at the moment, Jack, I am very busy with all kinds of things with the official Gerry Anderson website, which is gerryanderson.com. So we've got lots of lovely products and videos and blog articles coming along, and it is the 60th anniversary of Thunderbirds this year. It's also the 50th anniversary of Space 1999. It's the 20th anniversary of New Captain Scarlet. It's like they planned all this stuff in advance or something, I don't know. But keep an eye on there. There's lots of great stuff coming, some really nice models and things like that coming along, and plenty more news about especially Thunderbird's 60th anniversary and what we're doing with that. Keep an eye on it. It's going to be fantastic. And it's been great to hang out with you guys and discuss this curiosity that is Agent Crush. So thank you very much for having me.
We're very, very grateful. Thank you for coming along, and thank you in inverted commas for suggesting Agent Crush in the first place. No, I seriously, actually, I'm glad that you prompted me to watch this, because probably would have been something that sort of passed me by. I'm actually genuinely quite glad that you brought it up. So very good suggestion. Thank you for coming along, and thank you for contributing in the way that you did. I think that was a wonderful little conversation that we had. But for now, that's all for today's show. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Bye for now.
Bye.